So, today,
well, first off, I want to say this because I forgot to say it last time, and that was, I guess, thank you for being the first female guest on the show. So,
heck yeah.
Thank you. I've been trying to work towards that for a while. Just nothing was working out with people.
You know, I think if you look at the things that happen to women on the internet, I kind of get why.
Yeah.
But that generally hasn't happened to me, so I'm okay rolling with it.
Good. So, all right. So then, today, you came up with this one yet again, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's books that scared us.
Okay.
Or stories.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we're just doing 5 each, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And I have my honorable mention, which I'll explain.
All right. I know. I'm. You kind of told me the story on it, so I'm like really anxious for it.
Yeah. So, I also want to mention, like, straight up, like, none of my 5 are Stephen King, and I was actually kind of surprised by that. But I realized that, like, when I think of things that, like, really scare me and stuck with my brain, it's usually, like, really supernatural stuff. And I think the most scary things that King does are, like, people being terrible.
Yeah.
And I don't think that haunts me quite as much because it almost feels that's what life is like.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus, you know, encountering a ghost or a monster or something.
Yeah, I only have one Stephen King. I tried my best to not do it, but I had to throw one on there.
Yeah. Well, since you went first last time, do you want me to go first this time?
Oh, please.
Okay, so this first one is so dumb, but genuinely this haunted me. And it's funny because we talked about Richard Matheson last episode. My first 2 are actually both Matheson. But I'm going to talk about crickets first. Are you familiar with that story?
I am not.
Okay, I think it's in the Terror at 20,000 Feet or whatever collection.
Okay.
But it's this short story about how crickets, the sound they make is secretly them saying the names of people who are going to die. And if you figure out that the crickets are doing that, the crickets kill you. Which sounds like such a stupid concept for something that just really freaks me out. But, like, if you grow up with nature around you, like, hearing the crickets or the cicadas is just so normal. Also, when a cricket gets into your house, it's impossible to find. You know, it's something very creepy about, like, they know something I don't know and they could kill me. That was definitely a short story that, I remember I was reading it like the middle of the night and the windows were open and it was summer and I could, like, hear the bugs outside and I just was like, oh, they're gonna get me. Like, now I know and now they're gonna come for me. And it was very creepy. It's a very weird little short story, but it was one that I think, you know, a lot of people are really creeped out by bugs, and I feel like Matheson really just tapped into another level of bug fear that isn't like a giant bug or, you know, something really kind of obvious. It's this very subtle, like, the bugs are out to get you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an excellent short story. I do recommend.
I definitely need to look that one up. I don't think I've read any of his. Well, I might have read a handful of his short stories, but I only really remember one of them.
Yeah. Okay, so what's your first?
My first is actually one of our favorites that we've been talking about for a little while, and it is the novel Head Full of Ghosts.
Okay, it's going to be a whole other blurb when I talk about it for me, so you first.
Okay, well, like I said, it has been a while since I've read it. It's probably been coming up on 2 years now, which we're going to have to...
It's been about the same for me.
Yeah.
Maybe a little longer.
Definitely have to revisit it soon.
For sure.
But I just, you know, I remember it being about just kind of like a possession story, and yes, it is, but also it isn't.
No, it isn't.
And that's what really threw me off when I first read it was, it's the premise is very misleading because when you get into it, it's so much more psychological.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, psychological is a lot scarier than, you know, something physical that you can see in something tangent and whatnot. Tangible. And that book is just full of so many just mind-bending moments that are like, is it? Isn't it? Just, that's the whole thing is it? Isn't it? And yeah, just, it's because I want to say things about it, but it's going to spoil things for people who haven't.
I know, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody.
I think
it makes you doubt yourself as the reader,
Yes.
which I think is very successful. Like, you aren't always sure if you have a reliable narrator, and so I'm going to talk about something completely different, why it scares me, but it's definitely, it very much makes you doubt what's happening. Like, can you believe what's being told to you, or do you have to think on another level, or do you have to assume everything is a lie or a childish exaggeration? And that's very unsettling.
Especially since it was coming from a loved one and you want to believe them, but things are kind of telling you the opposite of that.
Right? I feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable just sitting in a room with a closed door right now talking about that book. That's how much it scares me.
I'm actually surprised I put it at number 5. I maybe should have put it at least 4, but I think the ones after this are still pretty damn frightening.
I will say that mine are in no particular order.
Oh,
It
okay.
was sort of as they came to me.
Okay. Well, mine are in sort of a from, I guess, the least scary but still scary to absolutely terrifying.
Okay, good to know. That will give me some perspective. So the next short story, also by Richard Matheson, is called Person to Person. This is included in most editions of I Am Legend.
Okay.
It's the very last short story, and it is about a guy who starts hearing a ringing phone in his head, and then he starts seeing a therapist to try and figure it out, and the therapist says, well, start answering the phone. And spoilers, he ends up, that's like the way that something possesses him is because he answers the phone, and so at the end of it, he's like, no, I want to hang up this phone call, and things like, too late.
Oh no.
Which, one, that super freaked me out because all possession things, like, that is my number one supernatural thing that really freaks me out is possession. Good Catholic kid. You can't escape it. But what it was about that story in particular is that I got really bad insomnia in college, like, to the point where I wasn't sleeping for days. And one of the ways that that manifested when I would start to, like, hallucinate was I would hear a phone ringing. And even now,
Ooh.
when I get really stressed out, like if I start to get like a stress headache, one of the weird things that comes with it is I think I hear like my work phone ringing. So this is always like, somehow I feel like my brain tied that story to like stress and not sleeping. And so that's one of the things that happened. So it was a story that freaked me out to begin with. And then the way my own life played out made it scarier. Because one, it's a possession story. And then two, like this idea of like phantom phone ringing is very creepy to me. And so that's one of the stories where like sometimes when I hear a phone ring, especially because, you know, we all have our cell phones on silent, like how often do you really hear phones ring
Yeah.
in our society? And so sometimes when I hear it, like I start to like think I'm going crazy hearing a phone ring, because that story unsettled me on such a deep level of like, oh, is that in my head? Because if it's in my head, I have a lot more things to be worried about.
That reminds me, I remember telling my mom a story one time of, I remember being in class and we were like taking a test. It was completely silent, and I could have sworn I kept hearing somebody call my name, and I would look around. Everybody's looking down, doing their tests. I was like, okay. The first time I heard it, I was like, okay, somebody's just messing with me. But I could have sworn I heard it 2 or 3 more times. Still, nobody's looking at me. Everyone's just doing what they're supposed to do. And I remember telling my mom the story, and she's looking at me just very like into the story. At the very end, she just goes, "Do we need to get you therapy?" I'm hoping half joking, but yeah, that was just a very creepy moment.
Also kind of a kind question though, of like, I'm not going to just write you off or tell you you're crazy. I'm going to ask if you need help.
Yeah, that's true.
Came from a place of love.
There you go. I didn't even look at it that way.
See?
By the way, the voices have stopped.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I'm glad to hear it.
Okay, so
the voices took over, Bradley.
Oh yeah, they could be that as well. Okay, so my next one is a short story, and it's one of 2, and it is I guess it's more of a novella, but it's Blanky by Keelan Patrick Burke.
Oh, I've been too scared to read that one.
So I mean the
I know the premise.
Yeah, to me the premise and even the first half or so of the story, just it reminds me a lot of Pet Sematary, and just the fact that it's very depressing, but it's because, you know, lose a child, and it's more of a drama. It's just the husband and wife trying to cope with it. Each one is just doing absolutely terrible because they lost their loved one, and it's very sad and depressing. But then, just like Pet Sematary, it takes that very horrifying turn, and can't spoil anything, especially because you do need to read it. There's just so different imagery in it that stuck with me, and luckily, Keelan is a guy you can talk to, and he will readily talk to you if he's available. And I told him about a specific part in it. Just I wish I could describe it, but he was like, he's like, oh my god, that's the exact reaction I was going for, and I'm glad that it happened with you and that I could give you nightmares because that image is still in my head. And I think it's towards the end. It's got to be within the last like 10 pages of it that it comes, and it's just horrifying.
All right, I will take your word for it. It'll probably be a while before I get around to it. I think the work of his that I know I can survive, I have and I've read, although I really want to get his new one soon. But that was one where I read that and I'm like, I am not in a place in my life where I can read that right now without really messing myself up.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
She's 8 months old today. Hooray!
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where I'm like, there are certain topics where especially because when you first have a baby, your hormones are on such another level that like your response to things is not rational. And I'm like, I know I'm gonna have to wait on this one.
Yeah.
So it's one where I'm like, I do want to read this really badly, but like 2 years from now. The TBR is long.
Yeah.
And well plotted.
Yeah.
I've got like probably about the next 3 years semi-figured out.
Oh my god.
So, well, when you're like basically halving your reading list once you have a kid, like you really I have to prioritize.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but yes, I think he is a master of horrifying imagery.
Yes, definitely.
I had one that made the short list for me that I almost put on here, but I could not talk about it without totally spoiling it, so that didn't feel worth it. Because I want people to read it.
From him?
Yes, and it's in the Dead of Winter collection.
Ooh, which one was it?
I want to say it's called Visitation Rights.
Yes.
Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yes. Is it like one of the first ones?
I believe so.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
If I could reach the book from where I'm sitting, I would tell you, but I don't know where it is because I don't know my shelves yet. They're new.
Oh shit.
I don't know where anything is.
No, I don't think so. I was gonna say that's not the one with the snowman, is it?
No.
Okay.
Oh, that one was great. I want that to be made into like a short film so badly.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
So good. Like it's one of those where like I'd be creeped out but also laughing like a crazy person.
Yeah, that's ripe for to be part of like an anthology horror film.
Yes, definitely. Hold on, I just found it.
Okay.
It is, Visitation Rights. It's page 22.
Oh, so it's the second one. Okay. I think.
It's actually a bit in there, but it's on the first half.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that one, honorable mention. Okay, are we back to me?
I believe so. We're on the third one already.
No, well, and now we're looping back to Head Full of Ghosts.
All right. Let's do this.
It's my favorite horror novel. It really competes with The Elementals by Michael McDowell, which doesn't really freak me out. It's just good. But in terms of like scariest thing that I actually really also love, Head Full of Ghosts. I found it because I just really wanted a haunted house book. Like it was a very specific mood thing that I wanted. And so I kind of Googled and I bought a couple books. I actually bought it at the same time as I bought The Elementals, which is kind of funny. And then I posted something about it. A friend of mine, my friend Ben, who I'm going to be talking about his book later, was like, oh my gosh, this book is amazing. But I was so freaked out by it because, again, that possession thing, I could only read it in the daytime. Because I was like, nope, I need bright lights. I need my husband to be home. Like, I can't do this one alone. Because he's so good at these very specific images that freak me out. So, like, the first time we think something might be up with Marjorie, like that image, the stuff with, like, the ivy, and like the leaves and the little toy house, like that is stuff that really messes with me. Like I'm getting chills up my spine just talking about this right now. But it's one of those things where I also just like really loved the characters, and I have so many feelings about, you know, sort of the end chunk and what happens and why. And you know, it's one of those things where I find myself, I think I read the book, it's been almost 3 years for me. I think I read it summer of 2016 because it was the summer we first moved to Illinois, and I think about that book all the time. Sometimes it like is when you're stupid and you like scare yourself. I start thinking about things, and sometimes it's like I start thinking about it on like a critical, that literary lens that I can't escape from, and start thinking about it like from a novel perspective and from where it fits sort of in genre and how it ties into other things. Like I could talk about this for an hour, if not longer. But it's genuinely just a lot of things that really freaked me out.
It sounds like we're gonna have to dedicate an episode all to that.
We should. Well, because the other funny part is that I bought 3 books when I wanted this haunted house thing. I bought The Elementals, Head Full of Ghosts, and I bought Horror Store. And so I also, for some reason, connect Horror Store and Head Full of Ghosts together.
Okay.
Like these 3 books will just forever be married in my brain, and they all sort of meet a different thing that I love. So, yeah. Also, another one I recommend, Horror Store, is fantastic.
I have it on my Kindle tablet because I know it's got a lot of images, and I know it's probably not a good one to read on a actual e-reader.
It's really not. I have to say, having the physical copy, because Grady Hendrix and Quirk Books do such cool things with format, that having the actual physical copy is really, it's an experience.
Damn.
Like the whole book becomes an experience. I would recommend, that's one I would say you should get in an actual physical copy.
Okay, I will throw it on the ever-growing list.
It looks like an IKEA catalog.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah. Although I'm of the unpopular opinion with Grady Hendrix in that I was very much anticipating My Best Friend's Exorcism, read it and gave it either 3 or 2.5 stars. I just remember it. I had fun with it the entire time, but at the end of it, it was one of those ones I kind of just forgot everything that happened and was like, I don't even remember what happened, and I just finished it, kind of thing.
I can understand that. I think there's 3 things I think are important about enjoying that book. The first is if you're how you feel about like 80s high school movies. Like if you have really strong connections or feelings about them, I think you will really love that book. I think it depends on what your adolescent friendships were like.
Yeah, I can see that.
So if you had, you know, middle school or early high school, like a really intense friendship, and there's actually been a lot of research about like the friendship between young women in particular, and that's sort of that third piece is I think also surprisingly written by a male identifying author. There's something very female about that story, because there is a sort of strange intensity to women's friendships, especially when they're sort of in their young formative years.
Yeah.
And that novel captures it so perfectly. This sort of like obsessive, almost deadly, like connection you have to your female friends. Like, my best friend, when I was going into high school, just decided to drop me out of nowhere. And I have never felt a loss of a relationship, like romantic, friendship, otherwise, the way I did that. Because there's like a trust that you just don't have with anybody else when you're like going through puberty and all these weird changes and society expectations and all this craziness. And that book captures it so well. But if you've never lived through that, I can see why it's not actually a very interesting story.
Yeah. And I do remember it being a little like Head Full of Ghosts in the sense that you're not getting a straight up possession story per se. Mm-hmm. You know, it's definitely a lot more than that, which, you know, I was on vacation when I read it, which you would think that's a good time to read a book, was, you know, because you have time to soak it all up. But I mean, I was also doing a lot of things in between, so maybe I just need to read it at a better time. I don't think all books are for everyone. Yeah.
We talk about everybody having different tastes. Like, you're not saying it's bad. Yeah. You're just saying it wasn't you.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do a lot more validation of that in the book community of like you saying like, hey, I'm rating this because it's not for me, versus you saying it's a bad book is not the same thing.
Yeah.
We definitely have books that we talk about where like, no, this is a bad book, like this is badly written, or it's, it's supporting problematic ideologies or concepts. Like that's a valid thing of saying this is bad. Saying something you don't like something or it's just not your taste, that's valid. We have to do better at like not holding it against somebody that they're like,
yeah, exactly.
I support other people loving this, but this isn't me.
I think that is one of the reasons why I think I did give it 3 stars and said basically that, the story was good, the writing was good, but in the end it just didn't suit, my taste per se. So
yeah, totally fair.
Yeah. I do have, oh damn, what's the latest one he just came out with the kind of like rock and roll looking cover?
We Sold Our Souls.
Yes, I have that and I haven't gotten to it yet, but it sounds very fun.
I will get around to getting that one.
Yeah.
It's on the list of to be acquired.
All right, so I'm up at number 3, and again, it's another, I think all of mine are mostly psychological horror. I think I'm seeing a theme here. This is The Deep by Nick Cutter. Have you read The Deep?
I have read The Deep.
Okay. Again, can't say too much about it without spoiling it, but first off, what really freaked me out was that I was going to try to pronounce it, but I will butcher it. I have that, I don't think it's really rational, but I have that fear of open water. I looked it up and I cannot pronounce it, so that already is the backdrop for why it's so scary to me, and then let alone they're submerged at the bottom of the ocean the entire novel. So that already, that sense of isolation and just you're at the bottom of the damn ocean, like you have literally nowhere to go. And
yes.
And then the whole psychological horror of it,
yes.
If anybody has ever seen Event Horizon, it's like Event Horizon but underwater.
Yes, I never put those two together before, but yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it reminded me so much of Event Horizon, and I saw that movie way too young, and even though it scared the living shit out of me, I still watched it all the time when I was young. And I was actually talking about it with somebody earlier today, and now I want to watch that again, but I also really want to reread The Deep. That's a solid number 2 on my favorite Nick Cutter novels. I think we might have talked about this last time, but I don't remember.
I don't think we did. I don't think we talked about Nick Cutter, but it's funny because I had seen, read Nick Cutter is so good, and The Deep, while being the topic that I was most afraid of, because I also share your fear of open water. We went on a cruise, and like the only way I survived was just by being drunk the entire time. So I wouldn't think about the fact that like I don't know what's underneath me.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that it was only in the Gulf of Mexico somehow was like a rationalization to me versus like crossing the ocean. But whatever.
Yeah.
But that's the only Cutter I've read. I really want to read Little Heaven. I just haven't had a chance to. But it's very like, I appreciate the layers of The Deep, because there's a layer of like, you are in this research station as deep as we can humanly go in the ocean. That is terrifying enough. And then there's sort of it's almost like the thing, like the research gone wrong, or gone complicated aspect that ties into it too. And there's nowhere to run, like even if you're up in like, the Arctic, you can at least run out into the snow. There's somehow like that open space of like air. You cannot do that under the ocean.
No.
So I'm very with you that there are a lot of layers that make The Deep very scary.
Have you ever read Sphere by Michael Crichton?
I haven't read it, but I actually, when you're talking about movies we saw way too young, Sphere. Yeah. It was on HBO a lot, and it was a very formative time for me. And I think it's Queen Latifah maybe, when she goes out and the stuff is all up her nose and
jellyfish.
Yes, that has an image that has lived in my brain for a very long time.
Yeah, the movie gets a lot of shit for some reason. I mean, I get it may not be the best, but I feel like they translated it from the book very well. Obviously,
Steve Cross is very scary and mysterious. I feel like that's successful.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously the book goes into more detail, which makes it a lot scarier. And I will say it is structured a little better. The movie does kind of hop around, like, oh, this event just happened. Now we're going to jump to the next event with nothing in between. It's like, okay. But definitely The Deep is to me Nick Cutter's scariest book, but my second favorite, only behind Little Heaven, just because Little Heaven is it's almost like Evil Dead in the sense that it's so over the top, gory and scary, and it's so much fun.
Yeah, that definitely just sold the book to me because I love Evil Dead.
Yes, it is darkly humorous, but at the same time is very scary.
Yeah, I think ridiculous and scary are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, no.
Something can be both.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was watching some documentary on horror movies, and they were one little section they were interviewing Joe Hill, and he was saying that horror movies and comedy mesh so well together because sometimes if you pick the right horror movie, which is most of them, like choose any Friday the 13th or Freddy movies, you for the most part do not care about the characters, and most of the time they're annoying and you just don't want to see them anymore, so when they finally get killed, it's usually in some over the top way and you're cheering because they're gone, but also it's sometimes happens in a very slapstick way, like Jason just punching someone's head off.
Yeah, I think that same concept is why Cabin in the Woods is such an effective movie.
Oh, I love that movie.
There are parts of that movie, I saw it in the theaters, and I saw it with friends who are very similar to me, and at some points we were laughing so hard we were crying, and the rest of the theater was looking at us like we were crazy people because they went in thinking it was a genuinely scary movie, whereas within a few scenes we understood that this was something else.
Oh, yeah.
Also, we were all writers, like, we're nerds. We could pick up on that in a different sort of way, but like, oh gosh, that movie is fantastic. Definitely, probably one of my favorites.
As soon as they showed the people in the control room, I was like, oh my god, we're going full on meta with this.
We're like meta on meta. Like, it's great. Also, it makes me giggle every time I think of mermen.
Yes.
Or mer people.
Yeah.
Has really shifted my initial instinct of what a mer person is. And I will be forever grateful for that.
Yeah. The ending of that is so good.
So good. Are we on my number 4?
You're number 3, I think.
No, I think 4, because I'm going first, so.
Oh, I just did my number 3.
Yeah, so I'm on number 4.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Okay, so I'm probably going to get some crap for this. So there's going to be some explanation, but House of Leaves.
I have it and haven't read it.
Okay, so a lot of people have a lot of opinions about it. A lot of people trash it, and I get why. Because the thing about House of Leaves, one, it's sort of fun graphically because there's a lot of, there's like 3 different stories going on, and there's some visual storytelling that's happening. I will say, I'm saying House of Leaves, but only the Navidson record. Anybody who's read it will know what I mean by that. It's one of the 3 stories that's told. Which, if they would ever make the Navidson record just straight up into a movie, I would adore it. I think it would be visually really cool. Like, don't get me into the other weird layer stuff with, like, Johnny and all that whatnot. I don't care. I don't care about those stories. Those aren't scary. The idea of the story haunting you, it does not play out well. I am not a fan of it. But the Navidson record itself, the story of this family and this house, where the house is bigger on the inside. Which, funny, I realized that I read this before I became a Doctor Who fan, so that's even more hilarious to me now. But where, like, they would realize they would measure the inside of the house, and it would be, like, inches bigger than the outside. And it's sort of the journey that the family goes on. But there's this moment, which it's not really spoiling anything, but there's a moment where where they're sort of starting to figure out the house, and the wall, like, one of the characters is facing away from a wall, and the wall behind her goes completely black.
Oh.
And I remember I think I read it. It was one of the first times I lived genuinely alone in my apartment in grad school. It was, I was home alone. I was like, I'm going to read House of Leaves. This was a mistake. I'm so stupid. I sometimes pick the dumbest moments to read scary things, but like, I just really wanted to read it. And I stayed up super late to read it. I slept with the lights on because I needed to go to bed before I could finish it. And then immediately got up the next morning and finished it because I just had to know it had to be done. But I just remember that moment has always freaked me out, and there are times where, like, I just feel really unsettled in my house where I'm like, please let the wall be the right color behind me. Like it's definitely a thing where I was like, because it's our houses like that's why home invasion stories are so scary, because our houses are supposed to be sort of our sanctuaries, and so when the house itself is the thing that's attacking you,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's a different layer of fear. Like, it's why we go and hide in the closets, because we think the spaces are built in our houses to save us or protect us.
Yeah.
And it's one of the fundamentals of that story is that that is not always the case. And it really freaked me out. It's exhausting to read. Like, it's work to read that book because there's footnotes on footnotes and pages that are upside down and crisscrossed, and it's work to read the book, but ultimately that the core story that everybody is commenting on is a very good story.
Yeah, I've heard it's a very daunting read, and I've kind of leafed through it here and there, and I came across those very twisty texts and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I'm very intrigued by the story, but yeah, it sounds like a very daunting read.
Yeah, you get there. Like, if you are okay reading anything with footnotes, because a lot of authors do use footnotes still as sort of an aside or commentary. If you can get into the flow or figure out how you want to read the story, you'll be fine.
Okay, yeah,
But you just kind of have to like play with it and see what you like.
the footnotes kind of threw me off. That was kind of why there's a book called, well, the whole thing overall. I know a lot of people have heard of it, but also a lot of people haven't heard of it. It's called S. Uh,
Yeah, I have that
yeah,
because it was written by J.J. Abrams, and I love him.
yeah, that was the main reason. That was what sold me was, and then the idea of it's a book within a book.
And there's like a mystery and all these items,
Yeah,
and
and you
yeah.
get so many little artifacts and clues with it. And I only read the main story. I didn't read the annotations or the little side story that the
Oh, but the annotation story is really cute. I won't say it's like mysterious, but it's cute. Like, it's a cute story.
because I know a lot of people were like, oh, I'll read a chapter of the main story and then I'll go back and read the annotations. And some people were like, I'll read them page by page. And I was like, no, I don't think I have the attention span for that. I have to stick with just one thing and see it through to the end. And I never went back for the annotations.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I can understand that.
Okay.
All right, you're number 4.
My number 2.
Well, it's your number 2.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going backwards.
Oh, wait, that's right. So this is my last short story, and it is The Boogeyman by Stephen King. I remember
What collection is that in?
that's in Night Shift,
Okay.
which I've only read, I think, maybe 3 stories out of it. No, maybe only 2, because I remember one of them being one of the Salem's Lot stories, and unfortunately, I think it's the very first one, and unfortunately being very bored by it. By the time I don't even know if I finished it. Maybe I should have finished it, but I just remember it being a lot of back and forth and people writing each other two people writing each other letters, and I don't know, it just wasn't clicking with me at the time. But I really want to read that collection because I've heard it's like amazing and his best one ever. It's very hard for people to pick a favorite out of that one because they're all so good. But I remember reading The Boogeyman on my Kindle at 10 o'clock at night, and if you've never read it, it's basically kind of a haunted house story. This guy is seeing his shrink telling him about how his children died, and he thinks his children died from the boogeyman because his kids kept saying they saw the boogeyman in their closet. And, it sounds like a very just folklore type tale you've heard your whole life, but it's Stephen King telling it, so he knows how to weave his way in there and make it even scarier. And I just remember finishing it, and it's got such a what the fuck just happened kind of ending. I remember finishing it and just kind of like staring at my ceiling for a second, and then just slowly bringing my eyes down and staring at my closet for about 5 minutes before going to sleep.
Success.
Yeah, and I think just so perfect aesthetically, because I think my closet was open about 6 inches, maybe like 3 or 4, just enough for somebody to peer through at me as I'm lying there in bed. And just the psychological aspect of it is really good. It's one of those ones that he presents it as, oh, it's just all in his head kind of thing, but then you're like, you know what, like, even though this guy is kind of an asshole and I want to believe he's just crazy, it's starting to not look that way.
Yeah. Yeah, those are definitely good ones where sometimes it's nice at the end of the story to be like, oh, it is something supernatural. You're
Yeah.
screwed.
Yeah, exactly. And
Every once in a while there's something satisfying in those stories too, versus the ones that like, was it?
and there's a saying in there, or a it's not even really a sentence, it's just two words that taken out of context don't really mean anything, but when you read it in the context of the story is very creepy, and it's just the words are so nice. It's just that. It's just those two words by themselves, like I said, out of context, like, oh, that's fine. But when you read it, it's like, holy shit, that is scary.
I love it when stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
Where like your associations with things and words and phrases is so warped because we read such weird, scary stuff.
Yes,
But
exactly.
like, people bring up a thing like to a normal person. It's just like it's like, when you read too much true crime and you start talking to people who are not into murder about murder, like you read enough horror and that same thing starts to happen is you have these weird, because really good horror is taking something that we encounter in our daily lives and just shifting it
Oh yeah.
and changing it a little, and so when we have things like a phrase like, oh, that's so nice, and so then you'd hear so nice and be like, and be like,
Yeah.
why are you being like that? you know
Yeah, it's so good, and it's really short too. It's probably, if it's 15 pages, it's maybe 12.
It's weird because I've read all of Night Shift and I honestly don't remember that story.
Oh man, it's, I don't know what made me jump to
But
that
I
one.
think that speaks to the power of the collection as well, that the ones that do stand out to me from that are actually some of his more emotional stories.
Mm,
And those are the ones I think are really well done in that collection. So you should read Night Shift so we can talk about it.
yeah, I definitely want to get into it, and we'd have to, maybe not. Well, I mean, we could dissect all the stories. Definitely have to break it up, because there's got to be something like, what, 20 of them in
There's
there?
there's quite a few. Or we just sort of, pick our faves and make an argument.
Yeah, there we go.
We can do like a bracket.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
We just argue our way to the which one is the best story in the collection.
We could try that.
That could work.
We at your number one?
Yeah, it's not really my number one. I also, again, this is one I have to set up with some context. I read this while I had a very high fever. So I had a really bad flu. And when I get the flu, when I get sick, and since I've been sick recently, this comes up, is that I get like a word or a phrase stuck in my head and it like starts to repeat over and over while I have a fever. And so that's what happened while I was reading this. But I'm actually naming the whole trilogy. It's the Sign of Seven trilogy. It is Nora Roberts. And this is why I'm telling you, if this woman would ever write a horror novel, I would probably need to like live under my bed and hide out for a while, because it's a trilogy about a town, and the town gets possessed by a demon. So every 7 years, the demon comes back and the town goes crazy. These three brothers, or these three boys, they're not really brothers, but three boys accidentally let it out when they're little kids, and so every 7 years they come back and they try and like save their town and save their families. There's all this stuff with like history and witch trials. Like, it's so cool. There's so much to it, but the main demon in the present is a little boy. And
It's always a little boy.
He's very gleeful and creepy, and if you're reading this, well, and also very kind of rapey, which is very creepy for being a child, and that it's used in a way that doesn't feel exploitative, but it's still very scary, because it's very specific. It's used very little and very specifically. But he's just terrifying to me. Like, the demon itself really isn't, because he's just, an arrogant twat. But the presentation of the demon as a little boy and the things the little boy does, just, I was reading to distract myself from how sick I was. And then somehow in my fever state, like, oh gosh, like everything I read was so vivid, and it's never left me. I've reread it like 2 or 3 times and I still find it as creepy as I did the first time around. Because it's very violent and it's very scary. And for a Nora Roberts book, not everyone lives.
Oh wow.
Not everyone's safe. I will say that. Maybe not everybody doesn't live, but like not everyone's safe, and the attacks are very visceral and very scary. And I love that. I feel like she finally just like really embraced, like, I want to write a really scary story, and she did it. 'Cause she's got plenty of ghost stories with very scary and violent ghosts or like witches or, she definitely loves to tackle like comeuppance for domestic abusers and things like that. But this was the first time where she was like, there's going to be a demon and bad stuff's going to happen. And it's very scary. Like, I think if I had read nothing else of hers in just that trilogy, I would still feel this way.
Oh, wow.
It just hits all the right notes of very creepy demon child, the right kinds of scares, the right people at risks, like, the floating outside the window thing. That comes up like just right and not when you're entirely expecting it. Like it's moments like that where it's like very, very typical horror things, but the beats that she uses them are just a little different than like a horror writer who that's what they mainly write would use. And it's genius. And that's what makes it so scary is because it's like, oh, I think what's going to happen here is this, but then it doesn't. And it happens somewhere else and I'm not expecting it.
It sounds like she does know how to write horror.
Yes.
It's kind of, well, I mean, I don't know exactly, but I was going to say it's kind of a shame that she doesn't not necessarily make that her primary genre, but do it more often.
Yeah, I think she's moved away from it for a while. She sort of moved more into like sort of witchcraft and Wicca and like communing with the earth kind of stories, which still, definitely have a threat and danger to them. But, she also writes really like hella good mystery novels too. Some of her standalones are about like solving mysteries and they're pretty good as well. Like she just has she's a very good storyteller. I think that's what makes King so kind of genre defined too, is like, it's not necessarily about writing in genre, it's telling a really good story.
Yeah.
And I think Nora Roberts gets she has to do certain things to meet the expectations of her audience because she's Nora Roberts. But at the same time, I think she just also says that she still just wants to tell a good story, and she wants to tell a good story with good people. And she gets there,
Yeah.
So in this moment was like, I'm going to tell this hella scary story about this town that was possessed and these, 6 people who have to band together to fight it. And she does. Like, it's still their story and how they interact and connect with each other at the end of it. But how they get there is like by facing some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Because you figure the first time the boys have to save the town, I think they're 11. I think it was their 11th birthday that they accidentally let it go. And so then they're like 18, 24, like not ages where they're people who are capable of really protecting other people. And that adds a whole other layer of like fear, A
little bit of helplessness.
Yeah. Well, it's very, anytime we have, kids in the story, we hope the kids are going to save them because the kids are the only ones paying attention. But at the same time, part of why kids make such effective protagonists in stories like that is because we know people aren't going to listen to them. And we know that it's not like they're going to go tell the first adults and the first adult's going to be like, you're totally right, kids. There is a clown in the sewers. Like, that's not going to happen. And we know that. And so that sense of helplessness that the reader feels because we know kids don't get listened to.
Yeah.
It adds to that.
Yeah. And I like that, you said about it's not necessarily about a certain genre, it's just telling a good story, which is what King does really good is, I'm going to tell this story about this friendship of these 7 kids who all have trauma and bad things happening in their lives, but also happens to be a celestial killer clown to throw in the mix,
Yeah. Well, I was listening to the Losers Club episode about the Talisman, and really the idea that King first had was not about the territories or any of those other things. It was about this boy is in this hotel and his mom is dying. If that's the starting point for a story like that, I think that's powerful. Like, I think that's the right way. It's not, don't start with the scares. You start with why the scares are scary.
Yeah. I'm still bummed they rated the Talisman as low as they did.
The more I listen to the episode, the more I understand their questions, but I also just enjoyed the journey. So I'm gonna keep my love for the Talisman.
Yeah, kind of the same thing. I do remember reading it the second time for my read along, and I do remember that the last act kind of dragging on for way too long.
Stupid Richard.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. No kidding. Especially when Jack gets to the hotel in the territories and just you think, oh, he's there, he's gonna fight and do his thing, and he's gone, and then you're like, holy shit, we still have another 100 pages left, and he's already where he needs to be. Like, good God. I will say it is a little overlong at the end, but we all know that's King, and I mean, who knows, that might have been Straub too, but...
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, we're at my number one.
You're number one.
Okay, well, it was actually really hard for me to pick a straight up number one without it being another King, but honestly, it would have, if it was going to be, I guess I'll just make this as an honorable mention, but if it was going to be another King thing, it would have been a King moment, and it would have been from It, and that would have been when, for some reason, like, I'm sure some people found it scary, but maybe not that scary, but it was a small scene with Eddie Corcoran and the creature from the Black Lagoon coming after him, and, you know, just Eddie realizing, like, oh, this isn't a rubber suit, like, this is real, you know, that whole scene right there just was really scary. I remember finishing that chapter and kind of closing the book and just being like, okay, I think I'm done for now.
So what's your actual number one?
So my actual number one, that I have probably talked ad nauseum about on Instagram and on here, is The Wicked by James Newman.
Don't spoil anything for me. I still haven't read it.
No. Just because he already sets up a scary story, like it's kind of got the folklore behind it, and he kind of takes your basic premise of, you know, this kind of blue collar family moving into a new home, just trying to live their life, but little do they know, just bad shit is lurking, and he takes the horror to the most outrageous places already, like the situations, but then he just adds this little touch of things to it that really take it into, like, what the fuck is going on territory. And I remember sitting on my couch reading a part, I don't remember what part, but I just remember reading it, and it was a very tense, scary part, and at the time, there was a cat living here. We were kind of cat sitting for a day, and where I was sitting was kind of, the hallway was directly to my right, and the cat came down the hall and came out of the hallway into the living room, not running, not going slow and creepy, just a normal leisurely cat walk. And I just remember out the corner of my eye seeing the cat walk in the room, and I damn near threw the book because it scared the shit out of me, and I was so in the zone. And I don't think a book has ever scared me that much. I haven't announced it on Instagram yet, but you more or less kind of pushed me into doing this last year, but I am going to have a read along of that, I believe, in September, because that's my birthday month, so I'll probably do a formal announcement of that pretty soon. But yeah, I'm really excited to get to it again, and you have
I will adjust
thoughts.
my TBR accordingly.
And it's not a very long book either. It's like maybe a little over 300 pages, so without spoiling anything, that's about all I can say.
Yeah, I'm ready to be scared. That sounds fine.
You will be, hopefully, anyway. Sometimes I'll say stuff like that, and like I'll build it up all dramatically and tell someone about a part, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I read it. It was fine." Like, oh,
how dare you?
Okay, well then.
Understandable. So now into my honorable mention.
Okay.
Most people don't know this about me, but I have a master's degree, and I have a master's degree in creative writing. So I went to extra college, to learn how to write cool stuff. That's not what I do. But it does mean that I have a lot of friends who are writers and who do write, or that I've gotten to read, be a beta reader for a lot of people. But the person that when you finish your degree, you have to do a reading, and they had us do them in pairs. And my pair was my friend Ben, which I know a lot of Bens, so I'm going to clarify Ben Wheeler Floyd. And Ben writes all kinds of stuff, but what he was working on for his thesis was a horror novel called The Investigators. And he let me read it finally the summer, actually, before our last year. I was in upstate New York doing my internship. I was living in a haunted residence hall, for one, like absolutely was totally haunted. And my bed was right next to the air conditioning.
Oh God.
And so I'm reading the book on my iPad and I'm so into it. And it was sort of like the moment you have with the cat where suddenly the air conditioning turned on and I screamed and the iPad went flying. Like I was so scared because there are certain, everybody has certain images or things that really creep them out. For me, one of those things is like hanging bodies
Ooh,
or like
yeah.
dragging feet really creep me out, which is an element that plays into the investigators. But it's basically, I don't even know how to explain the synopsis to you, other than at some point, sort of the younger generation is paying the consequences for what an older generation did. And towards the end of the story, like sort of leading up to the end point, they have to break into an abandoned high school. And in the process of doing that, a whole bunch of really weird stuff happens, and all of it were things that was like very psychologically confusing and unsettling, where you're like, or like something's happening to a character and you don't know how they're going to save themselves, or how are they going to get out of this, or is it tricking their brain, is this physically happening? Like it's all very unsettling. But I will say, like, I'm still mad at him for not pursuing getting that novel published.
Oh man.
I'll completely own that. But everybody moves on from the kind of stories that they're interested in. But I will say, I loved the story. I know even the incarnation I read is not the final version. I probably read like 2-3 versions back, but it really creeped me out, and I feel like there's a lot of promise there. So that's why I'm saying honorable mention. I don't feel like I can include it in my full 5 because it's not a published work.
Yeah.
But like shout out to Ben, who by the way was the first person I ever did a podcast with.
Oh, cool.
For a project in grad school, we had to start a podcast. We
Oh,
did
wow.
like 6 episodes and then stopped.
So you were supposed to keep going with it, apparently?
No, it was more that we had to do some kind of project that engaged the writing community. And we decided to do a podcast. We did a couple episodes, and then it just wasn't, there were 3 of us, in between our work schedules and life and trying to keep up with writing, and, it just wasn't feasible. And so we did our episodes, and we were like, you know what, let's just move on. Like, we're proud of what we did. Let's keep going.
That's funny, because one of my coworkers just asked me the other day and asked how I do the podcast, and I, just kind of told her what I do, and she goes, okay, because we have to do a couple episodes for our class in college, and I was just like, that's really strange that podcasts are working their way into college courses now, which is actually kind of cool.
Yeah, and I think our professor was a little bit confused that we did that, actually, because everybody else like started their own little like literary magazine, or and some of them kept going, but we were like, let's just do a podcast. I was like, yeah, okay.
It's a lot easier, somewhat.
Yeah, it was fun. I had a good time with it. I got to do a lot of weird stuff in grad school, but that one was a pretty good time.
Yeah, it was funny because she asked me, she's like, what do you do? How do you do it? I said, I speak into a microphone, throw in a theme music at the beginning and the end, and that's it. Like and ramble in between. And I was like, I'm very self-deprecating, and I need to try to stop it. But I was like, I'm not good at it. I just do it, and I put it out there, and she just started laughing, and she's like, well, she had a very specific thing she had to talk about. I feel bad now because I can't remember the exact subject, but I know she had to. She's going to interview somebody about the subject. But yeah, I was kind of flattered that she asked for my advice, but at the same time, I was like, how many other podcasters does she know? So yeah, I think that is cool that they're starting to, because I think there's even straight up college courses on how to start a podcast now.
Oh, probably.
I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. That's for sure. Damn, that's it. Man, there's so many other things that I could name off too, but for future episodes' sakes, I will refrain.
Yeah, we got to keep it together.
But I will throw out there. This is me attempting to try to do a ending, I guess, to the episode. I did throw out there today on Instagram that you and I want to do an episode of listener submitted questions. And as soon as we, we'll try to wait a couple weeks just so people can get them all in, and we'll have enough to fulfill an episode and not just maybe 10 minutes.
True.
So I'm sure the majority of people that listen to this already follow us on Instagram, but if you don't, there will be links in that description. If you are listening and you don't do the Instagram thing, you can just email them to ilovethispod@gmail.com, and that's it. We want all your questions about anything. Anything.
Books, movies, scary stuff, we're open to it.
Yes. Anything you want. We're open to almost anything. Don't get too weird. It can get a little weird, but not too weird.
Yeah.
All right, well.
Choose the appropriate level of weirdness,
yes,
and we're in.
Yes. We do like weird, but a certain level.
Okay.
All right.
Well, until then.
Thank you for coming on again, being a repeat guest, and yet again coming up with the episode idea. I will say, though, I'm proud of myself for coming up for the next one. So.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Thank you for all of this. It was fun. Again.
All right. Until next time.
Until next time.